Listen. Do you hear that? Me neither. That's the sound of the silent spring that Rachel Carson warned us about in 1962. She was called alarmist, hysterical, probably a communist. Insecticides like DDT were doubling crop yields. We can feed the whole world with this discovery, was what the politicians said when the insecticidal properties were discovered in 1939. DDT finally was banned from use 30 years later. That was then. This is now. Over 150 of the poisons have been banned in the United States. 85 other pesticides have been banned by other countries, but not in the USA. Some, like neonicotinoids, which are killing the bee pollinators, are still in use. And some neonics kill the birds that eat the insects. What's your guess about how long the human race would be around without insect pollination? Most insecticides, because they can't be applied individually to each of 10 quintillion insects in this world, are broadcast sprayed. There is no discrimination between good bugs and bad bugs. Of course, what could possibly go wrong? After some teeth pulling by organizations like the EPA and pollution control and scientists, we still have quadrillions of beneficial insects around, protecting us from, well, ourselves. Besides being indiscriminate, these chemicals are large, complex chemicals that are persistent. They hang around the environment and get stuck in plants like algae, the little green guys in the pond, who are eaten by the clear guys, who are then eaten by bigger clear guys, who are eaten by minnows, who then are eaten by bigger fish, who are eaten by loons and ospreys and eagles and mergansers. It's called bioaccumulation, and it results in one bird having the same amount of DDT, for example, as is found in quadrillions, that's at least 16 zeros behind the first number, of the little green guys. And you probably know the rest of the story with DDT. Eagles, peregrine falcons, and other birds dying, unable to reproduce. DDT gets banned in the United States. Eagles and ospreys come back like gangbusters. Happy ending. Well, never mind that DDT was still being produced until just a few years ago in the United States, and it was sold to lots of other countries for their use. Now we are down to one country that still produces DDT and sells it to other countries. And because of its persistence, DDT is still found in animals and birds and plants 50 years later. Strangely, DDT in ocean currents and rain clouds does not have to go through customs and immigration when entering the United States. Global problems need to be addressed globally. Birds and insects fly. Animals and plants and water and weather don't care one whit about where invisible international boundaries are. So the bad news is that poisons still kill about 72 million birds in the USA every year. The really bad news is that 72 million bird deaths by poisons is a small fraction of the total number killed every year by other causes. The grand total is literally 100 times more than that. Let's take a time out here to get something straight. These numbers I'm going to throw around are estimates derived from science. We humans like to think of things as either true or false. But science actually doesn't find truth. Science looks for truth. The difference is that it looks really, really hard. Instead of having a solid opinion and then looking for evidence to back it up, good science starts with an honest question, a possibility, and then looks for good evidence to answer the question. Sometimes the person gathering new information doesn't even know there's a question until later. Sometimes the evidence takes decades to gather. Often a new tool or techniques to be invented. Like Galileo made his own telescope, but it was invented by a Dutchman a few years before, and then he simply started watching the moon, Venus, and Jupiter and writing down observations. Later, he realized that he had gathered evidence that the world might not indeed be flat. Those techniques of the scientist are a lot different from "my mom said so," or "I heard it on the internet," or "some guy said this really, really loud many times, so it must be true." And there's still, today, is a flat Earth society, which ironically communicates by satellite. There are lots of guesses, hocus pocus, and outright lies out there on electronic and social media trying to masquerade as truth. Their object is to throw so much hogwash out that no one has time to sort it out with the quality and the quantity of the evidence. But in fairness, science only looks for the truth, and the honest scientists can only say that it appears this may be true because the evidence keeps pointing that way. For thousands of years, the Earth was flat, until it wasn't. And the good scientist always keeps the option open that what we think is true can change based on new evidence. That bus coming straight at you at 60 miles per hour, based on evidence, will probably kill you if you don't step back. So far, it has done that every single time. But you may not want to test that hypothesis. Perhaps Isaac Newton was wrong about momentum and mass and velocity. So with all that in mind, the troubles that birds are having and the trouble they may have in the future are only estimates and conclusions based on the best available evidence so far. Anyone can go out and gather evidence for themselves to come to a different conclusion, but keep this in mind if you do. Other scientists will examine the ways you gather your evidence and make their own conclusions about whether it was good evidence or not. That's just the way science works, and that's why it works. We have computers and moon landings and miracle medicines and amazingly detailed insight on how life on our planet harmonizes with itself because of science. Ironically, a lot of good data and evidence has come from citizen scientists. Since 1970, 50 years ago, thousands of bird watchers have contributed to a list of 140 million bird and species counts. Standardizing springtime breeding bird surveys, Audubon Christmas bird counts, international shorebird surveys, USGS surveys, thousands of eBird submissions, and over 70 peer-reviewed ornithologists' studies. A couple of guys who did those studies, named Rosenberg and Mara, with a team of 12 international scientists in the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology and the National Audubon Society, brought them all together. This study of studies covered all of North America based on the best available data. And keeping in mind that new data could change what they think, here is a sampling of their findings. Apparently, wood thrushes in the east have lost 60% of their population since 1970. Meadowlarks, our official Montana state bird, now have only 1/4 of their 1970 population. I used to hear them nearby, and I don't anymore. Evening grosbeaks are down more than 90% of their breeding population, but these birds erupt or wander in large flocks far from their normal range, so estimating populations through sightings is difficult. Now I have to stop right there and tell you, this is very complicated. Some species of birds and their offspring migrate. Some to South America, some to Central America, and some to the southern US. Some just migrate inland from the ocean coasts to reproduce. Some birds stay here and never leave in the winter. Making some sense of all that is very difficult. But they all breed here, and that's why citizen breeding surveys tend to be the most useful. After year-round residents and migrants raise their chicks, the bird population often temporarily doubles. So, a little arithmetic. We estimate, again, so far the best educated guess, that 10 billion birds nested and reproduced here on this continent in 1970. About 40% of all bird species are migrants, so it would be 4 billion adult birds that, at least if it was a good year, left on migration with their offspring. Perhaps 8 or 10 billion birds moving south. Survival rates for both the migrators and the permanent residents vary, sometimes a lot. But on the average, next year, 1971 in this case, there would have been about 10 billion birds that returned to breed. Same as last year. Replacement. Some of the adults died and some were replaced by some of their offspring. Fast forward to 2020. With millions of breeding bird surveys as evidence, best estimates now show that about 7 billion birds breed in North America. That's about 30% of all North American birds gone, and likely not coming back. Some kinds of birds are doing just fine. Ducks, geese, and swans have made healthy gains in their populations, mainly due to hunters' awareness and conservation efforts such as saving wetlands and discontinuing market hunting. Birds of prey like eagles and some falcons have done well because of the reduction of persistent pesticide use like DDT and federal protection by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Most of us have learned the important role that raptors play in moderating rodent and grasshopper populations, so humans rarely kill chicken hawks anymore. But some other birds are in deep, deep trouble. Aerial insect eaters, swallows, swifts, nighthawks, some of whom can eat up to 2,000 mosquitoes each day, are down 32%. But a single species, bank swallows, are down by 80%. Barn swallows are down 40%. Tree swallows are decreasing on the coasts but increasing in the heartland. The blackbird family, especially meadowlarks and bobolinks, have lost half of their population. Horned larks are down 67%. Sparrows, finches, warblers have lost 2 out of every 5 birds since 1970. In total, the entire population of all North American birds has shrunk by 30%. That's 3 billion breeding birds gone. In the USA, about half of natural land is now developed or under cities, roads, farms, pipelines, and other human domination. Of the land that's left, there are big differences in bird survival by habitat type. Grassland birds have declined by over half. Shorebirds, nearly 40%. Northern and high elevation boreal birds have dropped in numbers by a third. Our western lower elevation birds by 30%. Considering that we humans have developed well over half of the United States, and we are losing a football field-sized piece every 30 seconds, the elephant in the room reason why birds are declining is simple. They have no place to live. And the Fish and Wildlife Service estimates wind turbines kill just over 200,000 birds per year. That sounds like a lot, but electrocution by power lines kills 6.1 million. Communication towers, radio, microwave, cell phone, kill almost 7 million. Collisions with power lines kill 51 million birds. Cars and trucks kill 214 million. Collisions with building glass, including your windows at home, kill 624 million birds every year. And there's another cause of death which isn't going to win scientists any popularity contests. And I could lose some of the feathers in my scalp just for mentioning this, but somewhere between 1.6 and 3.4 billion, with the B, birds are lost every year to tabby. I really hope this one is at the lower end of the range, but 1.4 billion is still a whole lot of birds. That really sounds like a lot, I know. But there are about 90 million owned pet cats here. There are another 90 million stray and feral cats that have to hunt for a living. Even if your pet cat gets outside to hunt and nabs 2 birds each year, that's 180 million birds. And in the much larger numbers of birds killed by stray and feral cats, and getting into the billions doesn't seem to be so unreasonable. It's important to keep in mind that the natural habitat of domestic cats is Egypt and the Middle East. They are an invasive species, like knapweed or a mongoose. They are not a normal predator in the Western Hemisphere, but they are already here, and they are quite cuddly, friendly, and you love them. What they don't do is to fit into the natural system and balance of wildlife in the Americas. Stray and feral cats eat a lot more birds than your pet does, but mostly because your pet stays indoors where it can't eat a bird. One thing that will greatly help is to have your pet cats your friends, the indoor cats. It might mean changing out the litter box more often, but being indoors greatly increases your cat's survival chances. Think coyotes and car accidents. And it will really help the birds. The really good news is that we can reduce the bird mortality caused by every one of these problems. Cats, skyscraper glass, pesticides, towers, and power lines can be temporary problems if we choose to fix them. But that's the next video. The really bad news is that habitat loss, wild land tamed and occupied by us, is probably permanent. And that means that most of the 30% decline of our North American birds is permanent as well. Now, I'm not advocating shrinking our population. I like my kids and grandkids, and I'm sure you like your family too. But we might want to consider shrinking our footprint on the land that's still wild. That might take some planning and ingenuity, which to me sounds like the real American way. So what does the future hold for birds in northwest Montana and the Rocky Mountains, and indeed the rest of the world? That brings up the blue whale in the room. Our worldwide year-round average temperature has gone up 1 degree centigrade in the last 50 years. That's just fact. Thermometers don't tend to have opinions. To warm an entire planet that much takes some doing. Since 1980, the rise in world temperature has steepened and solar output has decreased. This is based on data, which is amassed to form evidence. And there is no viable alternative evidence that's come up so far. The world is warming at an increasing rate, and humans are the likely cause. So fewer birds will freeze to death if it's warmer, right? Based on presently available evidence, the National Audubon Society has projected the effects on birds in 3 separate scenarios for the next 80 years. Scenario 1 has us immediately committing to an alternative energy future, stopping the combustion of fossil fuels, drastically reducing rainforest clear-cutting, and clustering development to save wild lands. If we did that, it would limit temperature rise to another 0.5 degree centigrade and remove 150 birds from being vulnerable to extinction. Scenario 2 has us gradually slowing fossil fuel use and converting to alternative energy sources in just a few decades. That would likely raise worldwide temperatures 2 degrees. Scenario 3, we make no changes in our energy use, land development rate, and population growth. That would likely raise temperatures 3 degrees by the year 2100. In Flathead County, 123 species of birds could lose over half of their total range, and 60 of those species would be highly vulnerable to that possibility. 26 species of birds will likely be permanently gone from our area of northwest Montana, shrinking their range farther north. Here's what our grandchildren probably won't see here in the year 2100. all of these birds will have moved farther north into Canada for breeding and shrunk their total ranges by at least half. If that is the price of progress, then it's too steep. We won't just lose the wonderful opportunities to see and listen to birds if that happens. We will also lose their ecosystem services, such as insect control and rodent control and carrion cleanups and seed dispersal. Because you see, everything in nature is connected to everything else. And the results of those losses could be catastrophic for us. That bus is coming and increasing its speed as we speak. Our science and evidence is telling us to step back out of the road and onto the curb. And while we are at it, we can stop throwing our birds and our own life support system we call nature under that bus. If we listen, if we learn, if we use the power of humility we have inside of ourselves, we can change all of this frightening trajectory. In Birds Rock, I showed you the wonderful, important things about birds. This is the scary video. This changing world does not care about our denials or our opinions. It operates on facts. And we can choose to do the same. Next video, I'll show you how. And it will be fun.